Hello everyone, glad to see us on your channel. Today we will listen to the third part of Memoirs of German Colonel Stedel Luitpold, regimental commander of Paulus's 6th Army. After much wandering in search of the garrison commandant's office, we stop at a burned-out train. The iron skeletons of the carriages block our way. In the pale light of the moon, which now and then peeks through the rushing clouds in the night sky, we can determine that further we would have to drive on the rails, bouncing on the sleepers. A lot of time might have been lost, and we might have succeeded with difficulty. But who knows what awaits us in the darkness? And it is impossible to turn aside from the rails. So we leave the rover and go on foot. Now we are in an endless crowd of soldiers. Almost all of them are moving in the same direction, and apparently wanting to cheer themselves up, now and then call each other in different dialects. Is this the road to the garrison commandant's office? That's right, to the commandant's office. Straight down the tracks, and then to the right. Some people think so, others think otherwise, and others have no idea at all, and just carry on in the general flow. Slowly we make our way and push forward. Soldiers, like scallops, cling to each other. From time to time automobiles appear, less often. Horses. Complete disorganization. There is a disturbing hum, as one sometimes hears in a large station waiting room, which can no longer accommodate the flow of people. More and more shouts, screams, and whistles are heard. And here we are at a very tall house, an infinite number of floors with countless black niches of windows. This building is packed with people up to the roof. Where the entrance is, we can't tell at once. We are trying to find out to no avail. We are Streng, Urban, and I. We lost Wernberg and Weber in the crowd. Who would even think of sending everyone to the commandant's office? Perhaps it was because in this war a commandant's office was established in every locality. Isn't that why all those who aspire to Stalingrad, the destination point is the commandant's office? There is no entrance, nor do we find the communication center. In the lobby is a huge number of wounded. There's a fire in the corner. Something is cooking. They're in danger of being pushed into the fire or of being trampled on with all their brew. I would gladly join them for a few minutes. My legs have become like stakes. Severely swollen eyelids twitch. My arms are powerless, partly because of the weight of my damp overcoat. I'm chilled all the time. First, however, we must find the commandant's office. After all, they should tell us where the remnants of the regiment could find shelter. Maybe we'll have better luck in the house on the other side. There, too, there's an entrance with columns and arches. We may suppose that the building belonged to some great institution. We venture apart for 30 minutes to find some way of accommodating people. Events unfold quickly. I am in the middle of a crowd of soldiers that smells of sweat, lysoform, and rotting cow guts, which we are obviously sliding through. Every now and then I step on my feet or my satchel, stumble over crates or stretcher bars. At last we see a large inscription above the open door, Garrison Commandant's Office, eye of floor. But how to get inside? The entrance is literally taken by assault. It is impossible to convey the curses and profanity with which these exhausted people give vent to their feelings. Many make their way with the butts of their rifles, with which they push those in front into their soft places or crush them between the shoulder blades. No one protests. Everyone and everybody is being pushed. From time to time, one hears exclamations, "Keep your mouth shut. Bite your tongue. Don't make a feldfebel of yourself. You're not in the barracks yard." I try to stay calm. When I pull a candle burner out of my pocket and want to light it, I am outraged. Crazy man. What insolence. No one has the right to dispose of this place. No one. All nonsense and nonsense. The commanders are gone. Those cowardly birds are long gone. There's no order. I wish it would just end. It's time to finally send it all to hell. The door fillet flew out with a crack, and like a knife, plunged into the human mess. The urge to escape reality. I squeeze into the room to see with my own eyes what's going on here. This is the first building in Stalingrad into which I am entering, or should I say, into which I am being pushed, like a stubborn cattle being driven to the slaughter. Under my arm, I clutched a sack of precious breadcrumbs and a handful of coffee beans. As I squeeze through the door, some soldier has caught hold of my waist straps and has to be dragged along. His left hand is on a blood-soaked bandage. He stares fearfully when, in the flickering light of a pocket lamp, he suddenly recognizes me as a senior officer. At first he cannot utter a word, but his face begs for understanding and help. So we make our way up the stairs in a crush. There are soldiers sitting on all the stairs. On the first landing, the wounded are moaning. The air is icy cold. Everywhere you look, it's the same picture. We manage to get up the side stairs. There are restrooms and storerooms. The huge building is occupied right down to the last corner. Only a handful of soldiers try to escape again from this bleak atmosphere. The majority of them are pushed from one corridor, from one room to another, until they think they have found a warm corner and they'd fall to the floor. Everyone is so exhausted that no one has the energy to make another decision. In some places, the nose is hit with such a disgusting stench of stale and rotting dressings and festering wounds that one can hardly stand it. The whole place has been turned into a huge restroom. It's disgusting beyond belief. No one can help. The only thing possible is to end it. I shudder at the thought of being hit by shells. The summary of the Wehrmacht command still states, despite everything, the defenders are still not broken and, as a shining example of the best German soldiering traditions, continue to hold the increasingly narrowing ring around the city. A shining example of the best German soldiering traditions. How can you lie so mockingly when thousands are dying here without being able to fight? What is this but an attempt to escape reality somehow? After all, most of those who sneak in here are already marked with the seal of death. In mass, the soldiers are like living skeletons. They are pathetic figures who want only one thing: to sleep, to know nothing, to hear nothing, to see nothing. They have a high fever, they are wounded, they are fecal incontinent, they have been malnourished for weeks and are now half dead from hunger. And this is called a garrison commandant's office. Is this where orders are to be given and quarters allocated, as was promised to me by court headquarters? Don't the higher headquarters know what's going on here? Don't they have any idea of what is being done in Stalingrad? Are they so blind, so stupid, or have they so lost their conscience that they are drawing up orders as if there were still a functioning commandant's office? And yet it is good that we have gotten to know this house as well. Here all the dimensions of the incredible crime become clear. That we continued to fight for even 1 hour after the Russians' offer of surrender was meaningless. After November 23, when we were forbidden to break out of the cauldron, our whole struggle became useless. Generals, chiefs of operational departments would have to be here to see how soldiers go mad, how recently strong soldiers fall from exhaustion, how people turn into cattle. One would have to be here to despise and hate everything that caused this collapse, and not at all to seek refuge. Where would one get it here? The promise of normal conditions in Stalingrad turns out to be an unparalleled deception. Here agonizes the whole army. Here repeats what was on the field of the dead at Mitrievka, at Rosashka, at Tsaritsa. Further orders will follow there. As if there could still be order, organization, or, better yet, the ceremonies adopted in officers' clubs in this house of the dead. Excuse me, Lieutenant Meyer. Is there no other place here where I could die in peace? Please, I'm very glad, please. If a colleague would move over a bit, that would be all right. I hope you are not bothered by my stinking dressing. However, I think I still have some cologne left. You are very kind. Only please speak a little quieter. There are 2 non-commissioned officers dying on your left. They are very tactful. They do it almost inaudibly. While all this is running through my head, I finally make it to the exit. I lost the soldier with the bleeding arm a long time ago. Maybe he collapsed in some corner. Under the concrete columns in front of the entrance stands Weber. He met Oberleutnant from the division Wernberg and learned from him that the remnants of the 3rd Motorized Division and the 376th assigned to gather in the building of the city jail. Finally, we know where to go. The place of assembly, the city jail. Again, we walk along the sleepers. Like everyone else, with no regard for anything, we are forced to go against the current. A gray dawn comes. Now we can see the broken streets, the ruins of buildings rising among the destroyed neighborhoods and businesses. So this is Stalingrad, the first city we have been to since our stay on July 21 in Bondout, Belgorod. Wisps of fog are stretching from the Volga. Snow flurries are falling from above. The dampness penetrates to the marrow of my bones. I am chilling. I hear artillery firing, explosions, and machine gun bursts. The noise of battle comes from the ruins in the territory we crossed during the night. Ragged and battle-weary soldiers hang around aimlessly. The battle area looks like a huge marketplace that has just closed and the people are leaving. Only instead of empty pig crates and baskets, there are wagons and cars everywhere. We turn off the street to the right, pass through a gate, and find ourselves in the courtyard of a huge prison. Judging from the facade, this building was built in the middle of the last century and has been enlarged several times since. The windows, as in any other prison, are barred. The first person who meets me here is Lieutenant Colonel Wernberg. His appearance frightens me. Sunken cheeks, sharply protruding cheekbones, face red as if from frost. Around his neck is a thick woolen scarf. His overcoat is too short and drags on the ground. He looks feral. Worried, he reports in a hoarse voice that his men are placed with the wounded. No one cares for the wounded. The dead are also lying here. There is no one to carry them out. The moans are incessant. Couldn't our doctors at least help? No one knows where they are. We're entering a large room. It's like being in a poorly furnished living room. First, we have to get our bearings, find out who's housed in the prison building. Nearby in the room, with his hands in the pockets of his warm jacket, stands Colonel von Weber. He greets us somewhat affectingly, but with sincere joy. Next to him is Oberleutnant of the Medical Service Dr. Kaiser, familiar to me from the meeting in Mitrievka. He is friendly and willing to help, but is concerned, unsure of what will happen next. In the next room, we are greeted unfriendly. 2 camp beds are about to be set up here. The room has been reserved for the headquarters. The commissioned officer of the operations department asks us a few questions, from which it is very clear that he wants to get rid of us as soon as possible. On the surface, there is a ceremonious politeness, a willingness to perform his duties and services, but behind it all there is a crude selfishness that is clearly discernible. Fear of having to share his supplies with others. There are thousands of soldiers roaming the streets. They go from one ruin to another, from one crowded cellar to another, from one icy snow trench to another. And here they try to pretend that the headquarters still exists. I am determined not to send any more men into battle if the command itself does not want to fight. While cleverly citing responsibility, then no one else should no longer die for them. It is possible to force the command to surrender, especially since they are by nature too cowardly to take up arms themselves. Wernberg fully shares my opinion, and so do my officers. Colonel Weber joins us. We must carefully vet those around us. No one can be trusted. We put my orderly, Fluter Schroeder, who also made it here, in the front, because he is so thick-skinned that he will patiently endure anything, but will not leave his assigned seat. He is also charged with guarding our blankets and heating the bread. I am drawn outside again. I cannot lace up my mountain boots because my legs are swollen to the knees, which are soft to the touch and sore. My face is swollen like a bee sting. The nephritis I got on the hike is still not cured, but I can't sit around doing nothing, and I want to know what's going on in this building. Along the corridor, the floor of which is covered with trampled snow and ice, soldiers wander, supporting each other. Opposite our quarters are 2 adjoining rooms. The sentry has received strict orders not to let anyone in. However, in front of the commander he cannot resist. In the room a little furniture, Shelves, a long table, on the uneven board of which Russian letters are scratched out. In the corner burns a tall iron stove. This is the refuge of the general and several senior officers. Unlike those who share our views on the operational situation, they show extreme restraint. They avoid answering my questions or respond with meaningless words. How long can all this go on? Why does the resistance continue? I became more and more convinced that the cauldron was full of deception and self-deception. I was utterly disgusted by this pretense, this escape from reality. It pervades everyone, from sergeant to general. The stamp of duplicity is on everyone. However, the words mutual deception do not accurately express the essence of the matter. The line between lies and truth has long since been erased. There are still many who perform their duties with full knowledge and zeal. They could not have done it better in peacetime at the inspection to shine in front of their superiors. Here comes a field officer, clicks his heels and reports on the formation of the assault group. At the same time, he shows excessive zeal, describing how he selected each soldier, personally checked the equipment, and to perform special tasks allocated to soldiers. These are great guys, repeatedly received encouragement, and for bravery early promoted in rank. Reconnaissance he will carry out according to a precisely developed plan. Whoever listens to this may have the impression that he has already scouted in the designated area every ruin, every target, every broken car. Having briefly repeated his task, the field feeble just as youthfully turns around and leaves. The communicators appear. They have repeatedly tried to establish communication with neighbors, muttering something in a low voice, so as not to disturb the general, but at the same time trying to draw attention to themselves, so that everyone can see how they are trying. Then the Oberleutnant of the Economic Service appears and lays out a long program of food distribution. He points out that the supplies are stacked in one of the garages. He has posted sentries there. The Oberleutnant promises a supplement to the rations. They have organized several derelict vehicles loaded with crates of canned food. Everything has already been counted and divided, and the inviolable reserve has not been forgotten. There is even talk of increasing the bread ration by a few tens of grams. All this is presented as something extremely important. The report is supported by a table with precise calculations. It is not necessary to have imagination to imagine how the soldiers will receive their rations and even get drunk to the brim. The commander praises the Oberleutnant vigorously. To think of it, such a setting, and such good organization. Isn't this a great housekeeping officer? But here comes the doctor. Outwardly, he is already a smoked man, pale, dirty, unshaven, frozen, but he also outlines his plans and proposals, imbued with such care for the wounded that it is simply fascinating. Everyone wants to deceive each other. As unbelievable as it may sound, that the headquarters, as usual, are still in charge of their divisions, although there are only a handful of soldiers left in them. If you listen to what is being talked about here, you would think that everything is going normally and nothing has happened in recent weeks. Operational reports are coming in. Headquarters continue to send reports. No one recognizes that the troops are defeated. There are no statutory regulations on how to act in case of the death of troops, loss of combat effectiveness of an entire corps. Therefore, it is impossible to recognize that this is the reality. The feigned optimism on everyone's faces is shocking. Everyone is deceiving each other. Countless soldiers are moving along the street in front of the barred windows. For many days, they have been moving from one trench to another, rummaging through abandoned vehicles. Many of them have come from fortified cellars on the outskirts of Stalingrad. They were driven out of there by Soviet assault groups. Here they are looking for a place to hide. Here and there an officer appears. In this hustle and bustle, he tries to gather able-bodied soldiers. However, many of them prefer to join some unit as stragglers. The Soviet troops are advancing and advancing relentlessly from one neighborhood, garden, factory area to another, capturing position after position. There is still fierce and hard fighting going on. But on one side it is supported by the high morality of just defense, defense against the aggressor, who in addition has established an unprecedented terrorist regime, and on the other side, only despair and fear, sometimes still the spirit of camaraderie, and occasionally fanatical faith in the iron laws of National Socialism. Many are too tired to end it on their own and leave this crumbling front. Such continue to fight as others stand beside them, intent on defending their lives to the last bullet. Those who still see the Soviet soldier as the real enemy or fear retaliation. Around us are the ruins and smoking ruins of a huge city, and behind them flows the Volga. We are being shelled from all sides. Where a tank appears, the Soviet infantry, following directly behind the T-34, is visible at the same time. One can clearly hear the gunshots and the terrible music of the Stalinist organs, which at short intervals conduct barrage fire. It has long been known that there is no defense against them. Apathy is so great that it is no longer a cause for concern. It is more important to get something edible out of the pockets or dry bags of the dead and wounded. If anyone finds tinned meat, he slowly eats it and cleans out the box with swollen fingers as if it were the last remnants that would determine whether he survived or not. And here is another horrible sight. 3 or 4 soldiers, curled up, sitting around a dead horse, tearing off pieces of meat and eating it raw. Such is the situation at the front line. The generals know it as well as we do. They are informed of all this, and they think of new defensive measures. It is unbearable to hear when they come with a new proposal on how to strengthen the defense. But why am I not openly opposing it, outraged, pounding my fist on the table? Why do I not ridicule the general, his chief of artillery and his chief of staff? Why do I not throw in their faces that they have humiliated themselves to the point of becoming willless and blind executors of the Führer's instructions? I'm not capable of that. First, I don't have the courage, and mere indignation will not help. One must also know how to get out of this situation. Why does the resistance continue? Here, in the building of the city prison, in this confusion of impressions and feelings, of worldviews and beliefs, of weakness and exultation, of a hopeless search for truth, there is a struggle for what whole generations in Germany have understood by fatherland, homeland, and nation. For one, fatherland and oaths, including the oath to the Führer, are the immutable content of life. Another was just a fellow traveler, and Hitler never meant anything to him. A third believed that it was necessary to take advantage of the development of military events to eliminate Hitler. One of the generals was of the opinion that Hitler was the last guarantee that no communist would ever plant the red flag on the estates of his numerous noble family. The hardened SS believe that even if you stay alive, you will not get out of here, so you have to sell your life as dearly as possible. This point of view is shared by some senior officers who argue that since the Soviets put their officers to the wall in 1917, there is no reason to expect that they will do the same to German officers. The most improbable ways of getting out of the cauldron are discussed, and tiny groups are formed to sneak across the Soviet front line to their own with automatic pistols, hand grenades, and a few cans of canned food. Some commit suicide. There are the originals who probe the possibilities that maybe the oath to Hitler still leaves, so that, without losing honor or committing a misdemeanor, to break with him. Of course, there are also those who fight the psychosis of fear, recall the Soviet leaflets and the offer to surrender, and openly declare that they have nothing to reproach themselves with and therefore have no reason to fear captivity. Finally, some refer to Oswald Spengler. The decline of Europe is inevitable. The events in the cauldron must also be seen in this light. Years and even decades ago, we should have taken Spengler's thoughts much more seriously. After all, for him, the formation of personality, the intoxication with power, which in our time crosses all boundaries, was the highest attainable expression of dynamic cosmopolitanism. And it was Spengler who extolled the consciousness of superiority, the exceptionalism of Prussianism. I recall Spengler's speech at the 80th anniversary of Nietzsche's birth in October 1924, in which he praised him as the man who determined that the will to power is stronger than anything else, that it has determined the course of history since ancient times, and will continue to do so in the future. Stalingrad, so Spengler's followers claim, is precisely the decline of the West, in which the solitary cannot escape. However, officers at division headquarters say that it is necessary to make every effort to prevent the collapse of the cauldron, and that this can be done as long as help arrives in mid-February or early spring. And at the same time, very many commanders and staff officers leave the cauldron by airplane. A nefarious role is played by the Chief of Army Staff, General Schmidt, who categorically rejects any thought of negotiations with the Russians and any attempt to begin the surrender, threatening a court-martial, while he himself, with the help of several of his subordinates, and behind the back of Paulus stealthily preparing for surrender. Waiting weakens and agitates. Someone in the midst of the controversy threw the word wait. It was picked up and varied at every turn. Waiting as a salvation. But is it not a mockery of any soldier's tradition to wait in a situation where it is necessary to act as quickly as possible? To wait means to rely on something unforeseen on the coming hours, on comrades who may be in touch with the other side, and finally on the Red Army, which may not be so quick to strike the final blow. Waiting is debilitating and exhilarating at the same time. It is also reassuring, for the hope of some way out, which is neither surrender nor captivity, persists as long as nothing happens. Yet this waiting is resisted by reason, for all waiting is meaningless, irresponsible. In our situation, it is necessary to act. In fact, we have been doomed to this damned waiting since November 23, when we were forbidden to make a breakthrough from the encirclement. We have accepted this judgment. Hitler had no difficulty in giving the order. Does he know what consequences this order has for us? Does he have the courage to fly here, in this hell, and stay a few days with the soldiers whose heroic resistance and exemplary dedication he so praises? Almost every day in the reports of the Wehrmacht command, we find words about the German banners, which in Stalingrad immortal glory. None of us wants to hear any more about it. Does Hitler think that by forbidding the breakthrough, he will thereby forbid to think? It is true that in some areas of the German troops are resisting stubbornly. But in the name of what? It's a struggle out of desperation, a struggle for personal salvation. Now among hundreds of soldiers you won't find a dozen who would give their lives for Hitler. That's why the officers are scouring everywhere in the hope of finding reinforcements. But it's no use. No one has responded to the call to organize units of officers. That would be exactly what Hitler demands. The willingness of everyone to die and sacrifice. And didn't the Wehrmacht report of yesterday say that by our heroic actions we are restraining large enemy forces? If that is so, shouldn't we be ready to die for that? And if here, in Stalingrad, the troops themselves decided the question of surrender, then what would happen on other parts of the front, and what would become here, in the Stalingrad area, with our neighbor, whose flank would suddenly be open? So it is impossible to stop the resistance only for their own sake, and for the sake of their severely thinned part, and we must try to achieve the surrender of the entire army. But the army command does not go for it, and referring to Hitler's order to hold on, threatens a field trial. Now, at night, after 2 days of watching what is happening in the building of the city prison, I once again imagine how the generals, meeting with each other, discussing the pros and cons of surrender. The question of the risk here and the risk there. The Russians. Von Daniels, my immediate superior, is also sticking around. For the first 10 days after the division was disbanded, he disappeared into thin air. Now he's here again. He hasn't changed, including the manner in which he presented me with the Knight's Cross. You are awarded for the heroic fight at Mitrievka. Knight's Cross. Crosses. At that I remember the dead man at the exit from Mitrievka, who with his arms outspread out on the field strewn with corpses. Involuntarily I shudder at these memories. These general meetings behind closed doors are unbearable. You don't know anything about them. Of course, only a narrow circle of trustworthy people are informed. Is it only caution against those unreliable ones who might blab? Or maybe it's just a fear of running out of small supplies of tea and alcohol. Weber. I feel like asking, how long do you think this whole thing will drag on? He lies beside me, on the camp bed, in his overcoat, with his eyes half closed. A candle burning beside me on a stool casts a large shadow of his face on the wall, blurred and like the silhouette of a dead man. What an obsession! I see him dead. Is it not an omen? And his wife, his children. In the noisy crowd it seems to me that I am sitting beside a dead man for whom everything is over. In a shabby wicker chair sits Colonel Coeur, shrinking back. His head is bowed on his chest. There is no doubt that this man is exhausted to the utmost. The preceding days have finished him, seriously ill of liver. During the last hours he had seldom said anything barking, and in the East Prussian manner, he waited and fell asleep in a chair. Beside him sat Lieutenant Colonel Grau. In his still well-fitting uniform he stands out sharply among us, as hesitantly and quietly as he entered the room, creeping sideways along the wall. He sits all the time in his corner on a pile of damp blankets and waits patiently. Quietly and silently he waits and waits and waits. A wok stands on the stove. A rope is stretched across the room, on which socks, mittens, and boots are hanging and drying. Schroeder, settling himself on a seat from a passenger car, tries to start a fire. To do this, he uses sea grass he's pulled from the back of the car seat. It smolders and fills the room with acrid smoke. Still, Schroeder manages to reignite the stove in this way. Physically completely exhausted and lost all hope of salvation, Major Medical Service Dr. Meyer. A doctor by vocation, anything you want, but not a soldier. He is unable to endure all that he had to endure in the cauldron, where he saw so many wounded, starving, dying. Spiritually he is shaken. His usually so confident manner is paralyzed. His only hope is to find advice and comfort from an old regimental comrade, General von Daniels. His score with life is over. He expects nothing more. He does not believe in the humanity of the Russians, nor in himself, nor in his command. Sometimes he contemplates taking poison. He is always looking for an explanation for what is happening around him. The death of an entire army. No, and his thoughts are transported to Bielefeld, and he recalls old facts that many years ago testified to the meanness and insolence of the Nazis. Now and then he throws himself, sobbing, on his bunk, grieving for his wife, and seized by homesickness. He keeps coming back to the thought that apparently does not give him rest. Such humiliation, and this must happen to our army. The last meeting with Paulus in Stalingrad. On January 26, I meet Paulus as he leaves the courtyard of the city prison with several officers. He turns to me and makes it clear that he has heard that some people are thinking of ending the resistance. One thing is important to him: strict compliance with the categorical orders of the General Command of the Land Forces. No doubt they're given with reason. From here, from the cauldron, it is impossible to judge with all desire what consequences the weakening of resistance will have on the entire course of the war, even if it was only a matter of one day. So depressed and spiritually overworked, I have never seen Paulus before. His gestures and facial expressions betray great nervousness. I insist on asking him to familiarize himself in detail with the actual state of affairs. As for us, for several weeks now we have received almost no accurate data either about the enemy or about what is happening on the flanks. Improvisation has long been the rule, only agonizing hopelessness, and most, no doubt, and fear of the Russians still keep soldiers and officers at the front. In my opinion, we should stop fighting immediately. If the enemy goes on the offensive again, we are threatened with a catastrophe of unprecedented size. I know that many cellars and underground structures are filled with hundreds of wounded. What will happen to them? The generals are also waiting for a decision from above. Apparently, they do not want to do anything over the head of the commander. Paulus calmly listens to all this, however, remains in his opinion. Colonel Steidl, we cannot act contrary to the broad plans of the main command of the land forces, and we parted, not realizing that this was our last conversation until the day in March, when we would meet in Suzdal as prisoners of war. Soon after this meeting, I learn in the prison building that Paulus, alarmed by the surrender of General von Dreber, commander of the 297th Infantry Division, and the dismemberment of the Cauldron into two parts, northern and southern, indeed again warned all the generals from the separatist surrender. Schullemer and Daniels, who, by all accounts, could be brought to our side, again hesitated. Schmidt once again threatened a court-martial. Now, perhaps, everything will remain the same. Now, apparently, we will continue to wait and wait. I strongly object. To fall back into the lethargy of waiting is madness. It's irresponsible. We must act, at the very least, to confront the generals with a fait accompli. I'll talk to Daniels myself again. It's important to establish contact with the Russians without delay. Colonel Boyer, commander of the Vienna Infantry Regiment, also completely destroyed, declares himself ready next night to find a place in the front line, where he can cross the line without fear of being fired upon by his own side. I then proceed to the remnants of my regiment, which are housed in 2 rooms of the first floor of the prison block. The soldiers lie and stand in cramped quarters and listen to my arguments with intense attention. One must not lose heart, so I tell them roughly, and one must not allow oneself to be carried away and act ill-considered. It is out of the question that, having lost hope, we should lay hands on ourselves. It is absolutely necessary for us, the last soldiers of the regiment, to stick together. We do represent the remnant of the regiment. At any rate, I am not aware of any soldiers anywhere else who have broken away from our regiment. He can rely on me. I will do everything to achieve an organized surrender. I am convinced that the Russians respect international law. Therefore, we must prepare ourselves for this, and at the proper moment hang out of the windows some white cloth, or even the cover of a veil. The main thing is to remain calm. The same questions in the presence of the soldiers I once again discuss with the officers and doctors. At this time, my regiment consisted of 11 officers, 2 doctors, 1 veterinarian, and 34 soldiers. Despite the obvious bewilderment written on the faces of many, a sigh of relief sweeps through the room. For a while we stop paying attention to the distinctive whistle of the shells whizzing by, to their bursting and to the clinking of breaking glass. From then on, everyone tries to organize something outside the building, to find something in the broken baggage car or on the dead. At night I once again go to the upper floors to liaisons, orderlies and comrades from other units. Meanwhile, more and more soldiers seek shelter in the building. Everywhere the possibility of surrender is being discussed. Early in the morning our position becomes critical. Colonel Boyer has successfully accomplished his mission. When it gets dark, Soviet officers are to come to us to negotiate a ceasefire. But almost at the same time that Boyer returns, one major appears, who, on assignment from Army headquarters, must not only get orientation in the operational situation, but apparently also scout to see if anything is going on here that violates the order of the Army command, which categorically forbids surrender. We try to draw him into conversations that have nothing to do with his mission, but he is evasive. Major Dobrikov Shirk apparently notices that it is not easy for him to carry out so delicate an assignment. My statement of the seriousness of the situation he meets without objection. However, he apparently does not want to return to the Army headquarters with nothing either. So he avoids new questions and sits quietly and calmly in his corner for a few more hours. Inner restlessness makes me visit Commander Paulus the next morning in the Stalingrad department store, where the Army command post is located. Since the all-terrain vehicle is no longer usable, I, together with the driver, set off on foot. Under heavy shelling, we have to run from one ruin to another using the walls of houses as cover, taking shelter in cellars. At last we find ourselves in front of a building, the high and broken facade of which is like a symbol of our doom. At the wide entrance, a multitude of soldiers have gathered, seeking shelter. It's like the pandemonium at a mine gate after a disaster underground. And this is where the Army headquarters is located. After all, it was during the campaign in the Soviet Union that it became a rule to place our headquarters, even small ones, battalion and regimental, if at all possible, away from visible landmarks. However, here we are in the center of a large city, which stretches along the Volga for 40 kilometers. All around us are ruins and ruins like in 1917 to 1918 on the Somme, near Amiens, and in the industrial areas of northern France and Belgium. However, ruins could be seen there even 22 years after the First World War. How long will it be until new life blossoms here on the Volga? A quarrel with General Schmidt. We turn to the soldiers with questions, but we either get no answers or we get meaningless ones. Only at the far end of the corridor does there seem to be a little more order. There I get to the room of the Chief of Staff of the 6th Army, General Schmidt. I ask him to report my arrival to Paulus and remind him that the commander has repeatedly been in the area of defense of my regiment and that we know each other since the First World War. I need to talk to him again in person. General Schmidt listens to me, but categorically refuses to report to Paulus. It is, they say, is not customary that the army commander simply allowed to the commander. But I can report my requests and him, Schmidt. I continue to insist on my request, but again I receive a refusal. General Schmidt, to whom I have no desire to disclose my intentions, demands that I immediately return to his soldiers. Inwardly trembling, but trying to remain calm, I object to him. Mr. General, it seems to me that you either do not clearly enough imagine how the situation has changed, or do not want to know it. Don't you see what even here, right outside your door, is happening to our soldiers? You do not take into account that it may not be long before, and here it seems to me that it is only a matter of time, and you will have to reckon with the fact that soon here too, yes, exactly here, in the courtyard, and in these corridors of the cellar, German soldiers will start shooting at German soldiers, and perhaps officers at officers. Perhaps even hand grenades will be launched. This can happen quite unexpectedly. The general, stunned by what I have said, at first does not even try to interrupt me. Do you, Mr. General, I continue, do you really want to be responsible for the fact that the battle for Stalingrad will end this way? Do you really want to be responsible for the Germans shooting Germans here? We must end it soon. We must capitulate before such events. We can't let it happen. Schmidt's face changes. It turns scarlet red. In anger, he begins to shout rudely at me, then holds back, changes his tone, but no less firmly and definitely, pounding his fist on the table, and slowly, emphasizing each word, says to me, Mr. Colonel Steidl, it is impossible to talk to the commander. I demand once again that you return to your unit now. You know your orders, to continue the fight. Yes, yes, continue the fight. You know that we have other means to force you to obey orders. Don't do anything stupid. And he pointed to the door. A celebration on the occasion of the awarding of the rank. Here, consequently, nothing could be accomplished. I leave the room without attempting to get through to Paulus in any other way. Walking back down the long corridor, I hear loud voices through several doors. I wonder what's going on here. I swing the door open without knocking or reading the inscription on it. I find myself in a large room lit by many candles, among a dozen officers. They are tipsy, some sitting at 2 tables, others standing leaning against a dresser. In front of them are glasses, bottles of wine, coffee pots, plates of bread, cookies, and pieces of chocolate. One of them is just about to strum on a piano lit by a few candles. I am so puzzled and surprised that I find it hard to switch immediately. However, I need to find out the situation as quickly as possible. I ask a question deliberately loud, and it makes some people wary. Yeah, I guess someone is being honored here. Allow me to introduce myself. Colonel Steidl. Please, General Rosk is being honored. General Rosk. Oh, that's it. He must have just been promoted to general. How are you all doing? Have you all been allowed to leave the front? I ask. Oh yes, of course. Our plots are directly beside the Volga. You see, the broad course of the river serves as a reliable barrier. Usually everything starts at night or in fog, but so far it's been comparatively quiet. So far the defenses have been successful, The trouble is mainly caused by the crowds of our soldiers who have rushed from the west into the city and wandered in the ruins for days at a time. Such indiscipline is intolerable. Soon, there will be nowhere to put the wounded. Besides, everyone is demanding food. By the way, how are your food supplies doing? We are very lucky. A barge with flour and grain froze into the ice on the Volga. Besides, we had the foresight to supply everything we needed earlier. We even have bread. But let's talk about something else, continues General Rosk. I think we should invite the commander to join us. It would be good for him. He is often upset now. We should cheer him up a little bit. One of the young officers jumps up and wants to go at once to convey the invitation. I am offered coffee, brandy, wine, and invited to stay. The question of how we, in the western section of the encirclement ring, assess the operational situation. Apparently, no one is interested at all. It irritates me. I don't know. I turn to Raska. Have you experienced firsthand here, as we behind the station, at the city jail, up the Tsaritsa River, how the combat situation has changed? Is it clear to you that we are sitting on a powder keg? What do you suppose the soldiers here in the corridor outside your door are thinking? I get no answer. Everyone is silent, tapping each other, singing. Someone is strumming a march on the piano, and at intervals improvising the bars of a waltz. My questions are obviously considered completely inappropriate. I'm leaving. My driver, who accompanied me, stood in the corridor as if on guard, and of course he realized the entertainment here, but he didn't say a word. I do not hide from him that I condemn this frivolous carelessness with which they try to ignore an extremely critical situation. Besides, it is impossible to talk long. To get to the prison building in one piece quickly will have to make a lot of effort. It is clear, however, from the headquarters of our army to expect nothing more, nothing at all. Now it's up to General von Daniels to finally get his side. Mr. General, you must act. In vain I racked my brains as to how I could have a private talk with General von Daniels as soon as possible. We must see, Steedle, what is being done outside, he says. We leave the building and wander from one block to another. Just outside the prison lie wrecked cars with dozens of soldiers rummaging through them, paying no attention to us. They are now completely indifferent to the fact that a general or colonel is passing by. The search for junk goes on. Except you are greeted with a malevolent look that means if anyone else is interested in the same object, force will be used against them. Steele, begins the general. What do you think? Will I see my wife and children? The Russians, of course, will finish off any general. Soldiers, those they will leave alive, that's clear. But generals. True, the Russians have generals too. And yet, during the Russian Revolution, the generals were mostly eliminated. Should we capitulate? One of the von Daniels, and suddenly he breaks his oath. Steedle, can you imagine that? Really, it's high time to break up with this scoundrel, this sergeant. I have nothing to hide from you. I've always said that Hitler is a scoundrel. He's run us all aground. I'm not involved in this anymore, Steedle. What do I care about the army staff and the other generals? The chief of staff has gone mad. He lies and lies, deceives the commander, and thus keeps him in his hands. What do we care about Hitler now? Look at the wounded and these pathetic figures. That's what we should have shown Hitler. There's only one thing left to do. Finish it quickly. Or do you think we should keep waiting and surrender altogether? Eventually, they'll come to their senses at the top. What do you think? That's how my division commander was blustering. Apparently, he has overcome the fear that seized him after Paulus unexpectedly visited us. Obviously, he wants to know the mood of everyone individually and check if someone will not let him down at the last minute. That's probably why he came with me out of the prison building, where the atmosphere is oppressive, where one drives the other to madness, where opinions clash, and where no one can understand anything. We are at the broken wall, and we are trying to locate the machine gun nests which Colonel Mueller seems to have rebuilt here. We want to locate the officers and soldiers whom Colonel Muller drove here only as late as noon by threatening and grabbing the gun. We're looking for a junction with General Dubois' division battle group. We search and find nothing. Not a man in position. Not a single officer at the machine guns and mortars. Through the breaches in the wall, if you look towards the main street, you can see a Soviet T-34 tank. This gives me a new opportunity to influence the general, to make him stick to his own plans, which he, depending on the mood around him, either confirms or discards. The general pokes with his stick at the lock of the stationery box that lies in front of us. Not because he hopes to find anything useful there, but to give vent to his nervousness. We bend down and make our way along the ruined wall. In front of us are two soldiers who seem to pay no attention to the gunfire around us or to us. They too are waiting. A piercing wind howls. I turn to the general. There are no more soldiers ahead of us, and I can't allocate a single soldier for reinforcement. There are 34 soldiers, 3 doctors and 11 officers left from my entire regiment. They are all exhausted. See for yourself what a terrible state they're in up there in the city jail. What are we waiting for? The Army Command will continue in principle to forbid arbitrary surrender, so we must put it before the fait accompli. We have no more soldiers. I'm no longer fit to fight. Or perhaps you have soldiers. What about the Russians? They are not advancing here now with a certain intent. But how long will this situation continue? It would be important for us to end the resistance before they resume their offensive. Can you vouch for the fact that this state of affairs will last for a long time? After all, you've recognized this piggishness long ago. Mr. General, you must act. You must stop the resistance even alone. Is there any point in consulting with other division commanders? What nonsense is going on in the city jail building? What is said there? What decisions are not taken, again canceled, and again taken? General von Daniels is thinking more and more. He stands hunched beside me, stirring a pile of tattered laundry with a stick. With one blow, he throws away the cap that was lying there and continues to rummage through the laundry, stepping impatiently from foot to foot. "What am I to do?" he exclaims. "Think what will become of my name, of my family. Everything will become known at home. Everything. True, the oath binds no one else. No one, since Hitler himself broke it long ago. He promised to help us and did not keep his promise." The general turns to me with his wrinkled face, his lips swollen with frost. Angrily and with contempt he exclaims, "Ah, that Efrayat! What else could one expect from him?" In the meantime, the snow begins to fall again. The wind is blowing harder and harder. We are standing on the corner, from where we can see the narrow valley of the Tsaritsa River. Suddenly, the strongest mortar fire begins on the height on which the city prison is located. Then the fire is transferred to our side, to the place where the stream of soldiers who have broken away from their units rolls in waves down the main street. We have to take cover. In a ruined workshop, we duck behind burst tar barrels. There are rags sticking out of a snowdrift. I bend down, shovel the snow, and I find myself holding an undershirt. A new shirt. Is it decent to just take this shirt? I am embarrassed by von Daniels, but I tell him. It can always come in handy. However, Mr. General, no one can see us, and it would be foolish to let such a shirt go to waste. And the shirt disappears into the left pocket of my greatcoat. General Daniels thinks I did the right thing. Whether it was decent or indecent is of no interest to anyone now. From the snow drift, we pull out the belt from the satchel. The general says that the belt can be useful to pull our packs with it when we are going to be captured. Did I hear that? Pack up. So Daniels is seriously thinking about ending the resistance. It means Colonel Boyer didn't risk it in vain. We surrender. As dusk falls, we return to the city jail building. Right at the entrance, a field sergeant stops us and excitedly reports, "The Russians are here." So the parliamentarians arrived at the appointed time. Daniels seemed for a moment to hesitate again. "Mr. General, we are obliged to negotiate. With those words, I swing open the door to one of the lobby rooms and take a quick look around. Seated at a table are several Soviet officers and one soldier. Due to the meager lighting, I can't make out much more. General von Daniels. I introduce myself, commander of the 376th Infantry Division. He proposes to begin negotiations. The interpreter translates my words, as well as the reply that everything is clear. Representatives of the Soviet command have come here in accordance with the request of German officers who want to end the resistance. Von Daniels sits down and offers to introduce the German officers present to the Russians. This is followed by a curt "please," which the interpreter compliments by saying that the lieutenant colonel agrees. General Daniels explains briefly that here are senior officers and commanders of combat groups who are already aware of the contacts established the previous day. He asks for the terms of surrender to be announced. The Soviet officer states that there are no special conditions of surrender. The situation of the German troops is so catastrophic that they have only one option: unconditionally cease resistance. The main condition is that the German troops on this entire section of the front refrain from any fighting. The order to this effect must be announced immediately. The Soviet side is instructed to do nothing on this section of the front for 1 hour. General von Daniels replies that he agrees that it is hopeless to continue fighting under the circumstances. Therefore, he will not make any conditions. But does the Russian side promise to adhere to the provisions of the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War? This is answered in the affirmative. Then the general asks whether we can take the wounded with us, and in what order the officers and soldiers will have to leave. After all, some rules must be adhered to in order to leave the positions. The Soviet lieutenant colonel replies that there is no time to lose. Therefore, it will not be possible to organize much. If the Germans are ready to stop resistance, then the withdrawal from this section of the front must be carried out quickly. The soldiers must lay down all their weapons in one particular place. They can take with them only what is absolutely necessary in captivity for them personally. The question of what the officers may take with them is first discussed and clarified by the Soviet officers. Then the interpreter briefly explains that the same order can be adopted for them as for soldiers. After all, generals are soldiers too. Finally, the lieutenant colonel announces that the Germans must finish all preparations in one night. A communications team has arrived with us. We would like to inform our command of the results of our negotiations. If the German commanders fail to organize the surrender properly within the next few hours, and if there is resistance anywhere, the Soviet armed forces will launch the envisaged general offensive. There is no need to explain what this will mean for the Nazi forces. General von Daniels replies to this: "We will do everything possible to make as many units as possible join the surrendering ones. This is my firm promise. You can rely on the honest word of a German general." Hitherto, the negotiations have been conducted only between General von Daniels and the Soviet group leader. Now it seemed time to move on to the discussion of individual matters, such as the medical care of our seriously wounded, who were scattered in different places and left to fend for themselves. To my question as to whether our doctors could remain with our wounded, I receive an affirmative answer. The supply of the wounded will be organized later by Soviet personnel on the basis of the regulations on prisoners of war in the Soviet Union. At that time, it will be decided whether it is necessary to leave the German medical personnel behind. The second question concerns the feeding of the German soldiers. The Soviet lieutenant colonel is silent for a while, and then speaks calmly but wryly. At surrender, the question of supplying the defeated troops with food is not in principle solved in such a way that they are immediately provided with field kitchens full of food. However, whatever is possible will be done. At any rate, it will be more than the German officers here in the cauldron did for the Soviet prisoners of war. Are there any other questions? He now wants authorization from his command for his negotiations over the telephone line extended by his soldiers. The Soviet command confirms that there will be no fighting here this night unless the Germans violate the terms of the surrender, which must begin to be carried out immediately. These negotiations took about an hour. At about 9 p.m. von Daniels, together with General Schlemmer, Colonel Boyer, and myself returned to the part of the building where the remnants of the hastily assembled headquarters had settled. After briefly telling the officers what had happened and answering their questions, I hurry to my soldiers and tell them what is to happen during the night and the next morning. The few soldiers and junior commanders still able to move, who know the general disposition of our weakly defended positions, I send to the front line to inform those still in the front line accordingly. However, the generals, who are in fact no longer in command of anyone, are again engaged in endless discussions about what awaits them in captivity. At the same time, they begin to select things to take with them into captivity. In this case, the concept of absolutely necessary turns out to be very stretchy. One of them includes French cognac, special chocolate for pilots, and a bag. Another wants to go into captivity with 5 suitcases and numerous small hand luggage, and pretends that it goes without saying. One is struck by the coolness of the Soviet side, which at first accepts even this unusual behavior. Some of them absolutely have to sort things out also because they have not only topographical maps, but also orders which, since they have already been issued, it is better not to put in the hands of Soviet officers. This also includes letters written in the hope that it would be possible to send them out of the cauldron by airplane, in which the enemy is given the most unflattering characterizations. The question of whether it can really be considered that the stalemate is over, that the soldiers are no longer threatened with an inevitable slow death, is still unclear. For many, therefore, this night stretches on indefinitely, and when from any direction one hears the thunder of guns, explosions, or the crack of machine guns, it seems that the devilry has begun again, that the almost unbearable silence on our section of the front is only a deception, and that an even more terrible hell is about to break out over us. Stop fighting. As many soldiers as possible must learn what will happen in a few hours when morning comes. As many soldiers as possible must surrender, lay down their arms, save their lives. My officers, doctors, veterinarians also went to the troops, as well as 2 radio operators from the regimental headquarters, who had not participated in the battles on the open ground and in the snow trenches, and who therefore still had enough physical and moral strength left to counteract the general decline, the general apathy, by their actions. And it was not easy to do so. From one snow trench to another snow trench, from one cellar to another, from ruin to ruin, the dead, the wounded, the frostbitten, the half-dead from hunger, who, without even realizing it at once, meet the message of surrender with indifference. They again apathetically hide where sure death awaits them. The main thing is to try to save not only the loners, but to save all those who trust those sent, who put down their weapons, crawled out of hiding, and went to the assembly point, staggering, falling, rising again. What will happen to the wounded, to the completely exhausted, and to those who have gone mad? It's impossible to carry them. No one has the strength for it. So, it's better not to think about it. On to the next trench. Armistice until dawn. Surrender. Geneva Convention. Captivity. Assembly point. City prison. We managed to realize the surrender. Between 4 and 5 o'clock on January 28, we saw that the decision to end resistance had spread to areas north and south to the Tsaritsa River and had even captured part of the city center. The Soviet commanders who remained with us, some 7 or 8 men, including a major and an interpreter, continuously report to their headquarters that we have fulfilled all the conditions of surrender. About 5 o'clock, a Soviet lieutenant colonel and his escort arrive again. It is now possible to start moving. It is still dark, barely visible signs of the coming morning. We gather near the entrance to the city jail in front of the facade of one of the neighboring houses, to which a tall staircase leads. This is where our surrender will be officially announced. Many soldiers have gathered, ragged, sunken-eyed, exhausted, shaking from the heat, wounded, who, against all odds, have been dragged here. Then General von Daniels speaks. In a serious and heartfelt voice, he speaks only a few sentences. We managed to agree with the Russian officers on the cessation of hostilities, and I was assured that we will be treated in accordance with international law. We have a hard, very hard road ahead of us, but it is to be hoped that this way will save the lives of many. And this is the right way. It is senseless to die further, as it is demanded of us. It is necessary for officers and soldiers to behave honorably in captivity. He expresses the hope that one day we will see each other again in our German fatherland. In this farewell speech, which made a great impression on all of us, there was not a peep about the Führer, but most already know that it was he who condemned the Sixth Army to total destruction, that it was he who betrayed the whole army. The marching column is moving. Next to us stand Soviet officers, who by their courageous actions helped us to make this step. Then we, the officers, join the ranks of the endless column, stumbling and staggering, supporting each other, and sometimes falling. The soldiers move past the ruins, zigzagging through the gardens, to the edge of the ravine of the Toritsa River, and from there steeply descend into its valley. Through the frosty morning haze, we can see the snow-covered slopes and the bottom of the ravine, where the column of prisoners loops until it completely disappears between the ruins of small houses and factories. About 2 hours pass in this way. All we forward with difficulty. On this morning, everyone has to carry not only the weight of his weary, exhausted body, but also the weight of an incomprehensible and oppressive past, the weight of heavy thoughts. Everyone moves staggering, with muffled stomping and muffled noise, interrupted by coughs, deep sighs and groans. Sharp and hoarse are the desperate pleas passed from behind to the head of the column, to slow down. But the pleas do not help, because the pace of movement is determined by those who, still relatively healthy and able to bear the march, are placed at the head of the column. The measure in itself is understandable, because it is necessary to get out of the desolate, snow-covered desert near Stalingrad as quickly as possible. From time to time, short rests are arranged for everyone to pull up. But for many of them, the interruption of movement raises the fatal question whether this break will not be the last one in their lives. In the short moments of rest, nobody breaks silence. Everyone's thoughts are still too dulled. Everyone has to concentrate all his efforts on enduring the march, and besides, doubts and mistrust, which have already made the surrender so difficult and slow, are still plaguing them. I am chilled. My feet itch and tingle. My toes have lost sensation. Again, I feel aching pain in my knees and joints. Like a few days ago, my ears are swollen, burning, and rough to the touch. The itching on my eyelids has also resumed. My thoughts are confused. Was what had happened in the last few hours real, or was it a play of my imagination? My head is crackling so that there is not only no desire, but no ability to think. I feel tears involuntarily running down my cheeks. I can barely keep from crying like a baby.